and welcome to this channel. I'm Claire and I love sharing histories and creating my own stories around swords and the people who wield them. I love talking about queer heritage, arms and armour and sword ladies and the way these things often all interconnect in terms of history, culture and representation. Let's get nerdy about some really cool weaponry. And we're going to start with a great one. A medieval sword from Yorkshire, the Cawood Sword. So, we all know that strange ladies lying at the bottom of ponds distributing swords is no basis for a form of government. But there's something slightly mystical about finding a sword in a body of water, whether that's a pond, a lake, slightly sexier, or a river. And that's exactly where the Cawood Sword was found, in 1864 in the River Owls in North Yorkshire. And not only that, but found in perfect condition. I mean, pretty perfect condition for a sword found in a muddy riverbed. Come on, give it some slack. In such perfect condition actually, that we can still see on its blade a message that remains indecipherable to this day. Yeah. Oh, did I mention it's linked to the Vikings? How and why is a Viking sword at the bottom of a river in North Yorkshire, which isn't exactly in Scandinavia where Vikings tend to be from? From the late 8th century to late 11th century, the Viking Age and their expansion across different countries covers, a range of different territories, including the Danelaw, a historical part of England which is under Danish law, does what it says on the tin. This included what at the time was Scandinavian York, or as it was called at the time, Jorvik. But now it's time to talk about swords and dating. And no, we're not going to talk about whether or not it's good etiquette to bring a sword on your first date. Let's look at key elements. Its blade, its guard and its pommel. And we can do this thanks to people like Ewald Oakeshott, who not only has an amazing name, but is also an illustrator and historian who contributed an amazing typology in the 1960s of 13 types of medieval swords, and analyzes stuff like blade shape, guard shape, pommel shape. He has a whole typology of pommels. Let's get into that. The Cawood Sword is a type 12 sword with a type M pommel. Okay, sounds professional, but what does that mean, and how can you impress your dates about the sword dating of mysterious Yorkshire swords found in rivers? These are the really important questions. So a type 12 blade is more tapered and it's fuller, which is this groove across the flat side of the blade that usually lightens the sword, is shorter. It arrives down to 2/3 of the actual blade itself. Why does this matter? How would this have been useful for somebody actually holding this sword at the time and using it to kill people? Well, design-wise, this means that it would have been more designed for thrusting, as well as maintaining the ability to cut. Its guard is also a lot longer. So you see this kind of handlebar moustache shape on the Cawood Sword means that if an opponent was intentionally aiming to slide their blade down yours to attempt to cut your hand off, this guard would have trapped the blade. And if you were really crafty, you could use that to trap the opponent's blade, potentially twist it, and then find a way of disarming your opponent and finding a way to gain the upper hand. Or, gaining the upper hand in this context means potentially cutting off your opponent's hand. Here's where it gets interesting with the pommel. Fitting at the end of the blade, which would have allowed for balancing out of the blades, and meaning that you could fight in a slightly more fluid way. So this one, flatter with 5 lobes, has been traced back to sword designs decorating tombs in the mid-13th century and 14th century in southern Scotland and northern England. And this derivation of the Viking multi-lobe pommel is characteristic of the Danelaw region. And in fact, this pommel is the closest thing that links it to Viking characteristics. If you look at earlier Viking swords, the blades would have been chunkier and the crossguard shorter. It would have been more of a pencil moustache and not so much a glorious handlebar moustache. Initially, the Cawood Sword was dated 1300. But then, boom, plot twist. And as the sword opens the door wide and it's like, I'm your twin sister and I'm gonna disprove everything. Enter the Corsegaden sword, found only a few decades later in Norway in 1888, now kept at Oslo Museum, So initially it was found during railway works, something involving railways. Why is it so difficult? In a stone! A sword and a stone! Cyst. I could have gone full clickbait. A sword and a stone. But no, it was a stone cyst, which sounds underwhelming, you know. I think it would have been really cool if we'd actually found a sword and a stone. But a stone cyst is actually also quite exciting. A stone cyst is a type of stone chest. Really importantly, it's not a coffin, nor was it ever a coffin. It's too small and it didn't carry any human remains, any evidence that the sword was meant to be buried with human remains. It only contained the sword, its leather scabbard, and a wooden round shield. Oakeshott mentions that this also points to evidence of the Viking burial of swords during that period. But it's not necessarily a deal breaker, because sword burials also happened after the Viking Age, which I can understand. I think burying swords sounds pretty metal and cool, so why wouldn't you continue the tradition? But the real clue is a spot the difference game, because these two swords are very, very similar. See, it's same pommel, same guard, same overall shape, but not the same inscription. This sword has runic inscriptions on it. Say this: Asmund made me, Aslake owns me. I love it when swords talk. It's cute and informative. Later on, several runology experts date these runes to no later than 1150, but probably not earlier than 1100, which gives us a perfect time frame for when this Norwegian sword could have been made. And based on the very precise similarities between the two swords, we can look at the Cawood Sword and bring it back, swoop it back from the 14th century to the early 12th century. Boom. We can have categories, for sure, but sword makers and wielders won't necessarily respect them. There's no special memo for the year 1150 saying, Asmund, the pommel has to be like this and the blade like this, fit into a later on 1960s historical typology of swords. Asmund would probably be like maybe have some questions about the 1960s, but then Asmund's second reaction would be, Asmund doesn't care. Asmund's following his own creativity, sword design experimentation, probably the needs of the person who's commissioning the swords, and both of their personal tastes and cultural preferences. Asmund's gonna do whatever they want in this situation. Asmund's gonna Asmund. Making both swords all the more interesting and mysterious. Did Asmund make the Cawood Sword? Or was it made in the same workshop? Were the two sword wielders somehow connected? Lots of different questions that I'd love to have the answer to, which I don't have the answer to, but I'd love to. But we have time for one more mystery. The mysterious writing on the Cawood sword blade. And it's quite rare as far as inscriptions go on this kind of like early 12th century period, with only 5 of its kind from that period still existing. The blades have really high carbon content, means that the steel is like really high quality and hard, which means that probably explains its perfect condition. It was kept in the mud and in the rivers for so long. This lettering would also actually have been really, really hard to engrave on steel that hard. You'd only pull that off if you're a really skilled craftsperson, maybe a swordsmith like Asmund. So there's lettering from different scripts on either side of the blade. One is our kind of regular Latin scripts in capitals, the other one is Lombardic script. The phrase on the blade itself though, like I've said, there's no big plot twist, there's no big reveal, it's not legible. It's not actually spelling out a sentence, more like a garbled set of letters, and we just don't really have the key to understanding what they mean. According to some archaeologists, it could be a phrase granting the wielder strength during battle, perhaps with religious significance, because this phrase is flanked by a cross on either side. Maybe it's some kind of motivational phrase or quotes, but instead of live, laugh, love, it's something like fight, be strong, don't die. Which honestly, I would see framed in my kitchen. Just putting it out there. I'd love to hear your take on what could be written on the Cawood Sword, and your idea of what connects the two swords. The Cawood Sword is now being kept at the Yorkshire Museum collection, and it really is a culturally significant object for Yorkshire, and presents a really nice link with its Viking past and all those different cultural connections. It's not really mysterious, it's genuinely a beautiful object, and it's one of the best preserved of its kind, which just enhances that mystique around it. It's been reproduced, drawn, reimagined, and it's also a sword that you can forge in Skyrim, so that's something going for it. I've recently drawn the Cawood Sword in the hands of a swordswoman because I nerd out about weapons and swordswomen, and I think we can use some of the mysteries behind these objects to expand our speculation and imagination of who could have wielded them, because it's not so much about finding all the answers linked to an object. Sometimes it's about imagining all the possibilities for yourself and making an object live on through your sense of excitement, imagination, and wonder. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell! You can support my creation of educational and creative content around queer histories, arms and armour, and sword ladies on Patreon, where I post extra art content and research content. My social media, Swordswomen History Podcast, and Girl Nights webcomic are linked as well in the description down below. Stay safe, sword lovers, and see you in another video.